السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. This is the fifth lecture out of this course, the Revival of Knowledge, in which we are going through a contextualization of the Book of Knowledge that is part of the revival of religious knowledge, not religious sciences. And I cannot emphasize this mistranslation that occurred in the translation, in the title of that book. Because many, as we said earlier on, that the book was translated as the revival of religious sciences, and yet Imam Al-Ghazali, which is very obvious in this very first book of his, that he is stressing on the notion or the differentiation between what is knowledge and what is science, what is academic and what is more or less wisdom, so to speak. Okay, so in the past lectures we have talked about, just giving an overview since we have like newcomers today. We talked about Imam Al-Ghazali himself, his biography, and then we moved on talking about the book itself, the revival of religious knowledge. And then we moved on to talk about this particular book, which is the first book out of the 40 books incorporated or included in Ihya Ulumuddin. And we have been going through the sections of this book. And this book has 7 sections. So far we have finished 2 sections out of these, and we're starting the 3rd section today. In the first section, if you guys remember, Imam Ghazali talked to us about the importance of knowledge, or the value of knowledge and the virtue of knowledge. And we talked about how it is important that we revive this idea of discourse of virtues in our societies and in our modern day life. And then we moved on from that into the second section, where Imam Ghazali was starting to talk about I guess the second section is the most important section in terms of that he starts or initiates his, let's say, debate with the jurists and theologians. He is trying to convince them how they sort of think of religious sciences as religiosity. If you guys remember last time, we talked about this in details, that there's a difference between religious sciences and religiosity, which is in Arabic, ulum diniya and tadayyun. Tadayyun is religiosity, ulum diniya is religious sciences, and you should not mix these two together. Okay. Imam Al-Ghazali starts in the 3rd section to talk about the idea of blameworthy knowledge, that is, harmful knowledge, so to speak. And he discusses this idea, as he calls it, the knowledge in the eyes, or in the view, or in the standpoint of al-amma. And al-amma is sometimes understood as the public in general, and sometimes it is understood as the majority. And because it could be the majority, عامة الفقهاء, for example. They say عامة الفقهاء, عامة المتكلمين. And they mean by this the majority of jurists, the majority of theologians. And sometimes they would say al-amma, and they would not limit it or attribute it or affiliate it to a certain group of people. So sometimes it is understood as the general public, not the majority of a certain discipline or certain scholars, group of scholars. And Imam Al-Ghazali here, he does not specify who are al-amma. Does he mean al-amma like people who are out there in the markets, people who have grocery shops, people who are working as farmers, people who are part of the government? He does not specify. What does he mean by al-amma? He does not say, is it ammat al-fuqaha or ammat al-mutakallimin, for example. But he says al-amma. But when you read what he is talking about notions that are very much related to the academic sphere. He talks about ilm al-kalam, he talks about al-munadarat, debates, intellectual debates or academic debates. And these ideas were very much, or these events were very much limited to the people who are involved in scholarly studies or works. So when he says al-amma, he is probably referring to the majority of jurists and theologians. But one of the interesting ideas that perhaps he did not specify them because he was sort of seeing that this majority of theologians and jurists are the ones responsible for creating the public opinion. So in other words, whatever you guys, as a majority of theologians, as a majority of jurists, whatever you guys believe would then be transferred to the general public. So if you guys, as the people at the threshold of intellectuality in Islam, if you guys don't differentiate between what is a science, what is a discipline, what is academic, and what is a religious practice, what is part of religiosity, then if this is the case with you guys, therefore we should not be expecting anything different from the general public, because they take from you, they acquire from you the understanding and the perception of the religion. So here he is talking about there's a blameworthy knowledge, and this is he is taking his argument against them a step forward. If you remember last time, Imam Al-Ghazali, what he did, he used this method of division, and he said, if we want to know what is beneficial knowledge, what is harmful knowledge, what is required, what is not required, he used a juristic approach. If you guys remember, he divided the disciplines or the knowledge, sort of speak, to something that is obliged, something that is mandatory, and on the individual, which is fardu ayn, and then something that is mandatory on the collective society. So he used this juristic approach. Now he's taking, and he established this idea, okay? Now he's taking the argument a step forward. He's saying that knowledge, and here he's giving the impression, or actually he's almost saying it directly, that he's talking about knowledge, not a science. If you remember last time, and the time before, we said that Imam Al-Ghazali, he uses this term ilm to refer to a science or to refer to knowledge interchangeably. He does not fix the usage of this word. Sometimes he would say ilm and he would mean ilm tawheed, for example, or ilm usul fiqh. Ilm usul fiqh, we don't use it to refer to the knowledge or wisdom, but rather we refer to an academic knowledge, a structured, standardized, codified, sort of speak, data or information or knowledge, all right? But when he uses the word knowledge in other cases, where he refers to whatever knowledge is beneficial, whatever is mandatory, whatever is recommended, there he refers to the idea of knowledge, but not a science, not a discipline, not academia. In this particular, as I was saying, in this particular section, Imam Al-Ghazali is talking about knowledge as in what we acquire of information, or whatever we acquire of understanding or comprehension of realities. He's not talking here about structures, although he does touch upon these ideas. Let's see what he's actually presenting in this section. As I said, this section is talking about the blameworthy knowledge. And this compound is sort of, could cause some kind of irritation. When you say blameworthy knowledge, people think knowledge is always seen as something that is intrinsically good. It's knowledge. If we start, down speaking about knowledge, we say blameworthy knowledge, then we're giving the impression that knowledge could be bad and could be harmful. And I want you to note something, and this is part of the contextualization that we're doing. Imagine that you today start talking to people about this idea, blameworthy knowledge. There's a kind of knowledge that if you acquire it, you're blamed for acquiring it. That if you comprehend it, if you grasp it, then it is harmful. And we're in a century of knowledge boom, where knowledge is it's one of your inalienable rights to acquire knowledge. It's part of freedom. That I'm a free person and it's my right to know things, right? This is the notions that are being used in today's world. It's my right to know. We have to know. And we deal with it as something that is, we take it for granted. We don't stop and think. Because there are usually, people use in this context mixed cards. Because on one hand, people, when they talk about this idea, my right to know, or the freedom of knowledge, and that everything should be given to the public, everything should be available, everything should be within our reach, within our grasp, and everything should be abundant as well. Knowledge should be abundant, it should not be scarce, it should not be rare, it should not be hard to acquire, but rather make knowledge easy to attain. This is all the notions that we hear about. The mixed cards that are used in our modern day world is that people start saying, look, if you start saying that there is, blameworthy knowledge and knowledge that should not be available to people and so on, people think of politics. People think of crimes that are hidden, for example. People think of corruption. But when we talk about this in terms of academia, it gets really, the notion gets really perplexed. Because here Imam Al-Ghazali is not discussing politics. He's not discussing this idea of what should be presented to the public, of what's going on in the, in the governmental divisions or anything of that sort. Imam Al-Ghazali is not discussing this idea. Imam Al-Ghazali is saying, in terms of knowledge and religion, in terms of knowledge, and in the context of the person's religiosity, there is knowledge that would hinder the religiosity of a person. But again, people, even with this sort of discourse, they would reject. When you talk to people about this book you should not read, you say, what do you mean you should not read? This book you should not buy, you should not acquire. It's not your level yet. What do you mean it's not my level? They take it as an insult, or they take it as if you're doing some kind of filtration, or you're doing some kind of oppression. Because the notions that are really celebrated in today's world is this kind of anarchist notions where everything should be available, should not be restrictions, there should not be any kind of authority that restricts what should be done, what should not be done. Standardizations of things are really challenged. So Imam Al-Ghazali's world had that same challenge. He is coming to the spheres, academic spheres in his world, and he's trying to deliver a message that says there are types of knowledge that could be considered blameworthy and they're harmful. And at his time that was seen very obscure. This is very weird. It's strange. Because, see, Imam Al-Ghazali was at a time where they had some kind of a knowledge boom in the religious sciences. When you think about it, because Imam Al-Ghazali he was a student of Imam Al-Haramain Al-Juwayni. And Imam Al-Haramain Al-Juwayni, for example, in Ilm al-Kalam, he's at a very decisive point. All the rhetoric, all the works, all the books and texts that were written during the earlier periods than Imam al-Haramayn in Ilm al-Kalam had a certain style. And after and from Imam al-Haramayn, Abu al-Ma'ali al-Juwayni, and onward, the types of books that were written in theology were completely different. For this reason, actually, some scholars would say that the two turning points in the history of Ilm al-Kalam, in the history of theology, were Imam al-Haramayn, Abu al-Ma'ali al-Juwayni, and then Imam Fakhr al-Din al-Razi radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Both of them transformed the reality of theology in their times. So Imam Al-Ghazali came at that peak. He's a student of a teacher who transformed Ilm al-Kalam. And Ilm al-Kalam then was gaining momentum. And it was not, things were no longer limited to the idea of a hostility between the Ash'aris and the Mu'tazilis. It was no longer that only. There are now Batinis, and the philosophers were also present. So things began to change. So he's coming at when theology and also fiqh, you could say the same thing about fiqh. Imam al-Haramayn Abu Ali al-Juwayni, he wrote Nihayat al-Matlab, which was only in the modern world, it was only printed, a few years ago. So he came at a point where these disciplines, where the Muslim academia was gaining momentum and things were iterating in a very rapid speed. Whether books or lessons, institutions. And he's coming at that point to start saying, hold up, you're going too fast. So this is very difficult. It's almost as difficult when you go to people now, when everybody is saying knowledge should be free, knowledge should be available, and you tell them, hold on, no, it should not be. Or not necessarily that he's not saying it should not be available, but he's rather saying be sensible about whatever is being free and open. Because see, again, people when they hear the word free, and at the same time when they hear that you're objecting to this idea of being free, they think that you're talking about money. Not free in the terms of open, available, without conditions, without restrictions, without prerequisites, and so forth. Okay. So Imam Al-Ghazali, at that point, he's introducing this idea of blameworthy knowledge. Now it's obvious to you, it's apparent, how this compound is very difficult, it's very challengeable for a scholar at that period of time to bring it up. Because what's in the mindsets, in the psyche of scholars, we are gaining momentum. The Muslim nation is prosperous. The Muslim reality in academia, we're creating, something that is really profound, something that was not witnessed before. And there you come, and you are iconic. This is, I'm trying to imagine, this probably was in their minds. You as Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, you're really iconic. Why are you trying to stop this? But he's not trying to stop it. What he's really seeing is that when you're having a boom in something, when something is rapidly spreading, there must be a voice of conscience within that. There must be somebody calling for sensibility, for being sensible about things, not taking things for granted. Because when things are being taken for granted, important issues are being forgotten. I guess after the second section, you guys would grant that Imam Al-Ghazali gave ground against the theologians and the jurists. So he's building up on this. he does not give any sort of introductions anymore. He gets right into the subject. And this is something you can learn when you're debating. In the beginning, you need to sort of lay out introductions, lay out common grounds that your opponent would agree to. And once you do that, you start saying whatever he or she agreed on, what does their agreement entail? Alright? So if you agree to this, then you would have to agree to that. So he moves on by saying, there is something, by saying in the beginning, he says, you might ask, how come you're calling knowledge blameworthy? Al-ilm al-mathmoom. We don't ever think about this idea. We put this adjective with this noun. It's not out of good taste even. So he says, you might think how we would say that, especially when al-ilm is an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then he says, I'm not saying that knowledge is blameworthy for itself. He's saying that it is called as such. I am calling these types that I'm going to mention, these types of knowledge are blameworthy, not because knowledge in itself is blameworthy, but rather of something else. Okay? So he gets that kind of objection out of his way. If you're saying that it is not proper to use the word mazmoom with the word ilm, it's not proper to use the word blameworthy with the word knowledge, I'm letting you know the context that I'm speaking about. I'm not talking about that knowledge is in itself blameworthy, because knowledge in itself is revealing, is understanding, is an attribute or a trait that reveals things, right? Or the actual acquirement of this process or this reality of revealing. But rather, I'm saying that these types of knowledge, they're blameworthy for the consequences. And here he uses some kind of a utilitarian method in the argument. He says, a knowledge could be blameworthy for one of three conditions. The first condition, if this knowledge leads to a harm for the person who acquires that knowledge, or for somebody else. Alright? So it's a type of knowledge. If a person acquires it, he or she will be harmed, or somebody else. And here he is saying or implying that the harm is not something that is doubted to occur or not, but rather it's something that could be affirmed, that whoever would acquire that type of knowledge will most likely or will definitely fall into some kind of harm for himself or somebody else. And he gives an example of this with magic, for example. So he would say that magic would cause harm to the person himself or for somebody else. And then the second type of harmful or blameworthy knowledge is the knowledge that would usually, and he uses the word غالباً or fil ghalib, usually, not necessarily always, but usually would cause harm for the person. And he uses astrology as an example. Do I need to differentiate between astronomy and astrology? No? Okay. Astrology, horoscopes. Okay. Astronomy is a study of the astrophysics, but astrology is using that, the products, the conclusions of astronomy to talk about expectations and speculations of future events, or sometimes they use it to describe traits and attributes of people and so on and so forth. And even when Imam Ghazali is discussing this, because back then, in Arabic, they did not have that distinct difference between astronomy and astrology. They would say ilm al-nujum. So sometimes the term ilm al-nujum, people would think of ilm al-nujum as astronomy, and sometimes they would think of it as astrology. So he differentiated between both of them. Whatever is mathematical, which he's referring to the astronomy, or it is related to the speculations. And he goes on to also, again, Imam Ghazali here is using a logical structure because he's dividing things into categories, and would take, for example, the second category, which is learning astrology, and he would divide the reasons why astrology is usually harmful. He would give 3 reasons, and he would also divide these reasons into categories as well. He mentions 3 things why astrology is harmful, and the second reason, he provides a very interesting metaphor. Let's first illustrate the 3 reasons. The first reason why he's saying astrology is harmful, because he sees that people start believing into this idea that planets or the structures of planets or galaxies are somewhat influencing the actions and the behaviors of individuals. And that, of course, would hinder the belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of such events. And actually, the metaphor he gives for this particular reason, he says, don't be like the ant. He calls it mithalun namla, the metaphor or the simile of the ant. He says, an ant, if we imagine an ant is, walking on a sheet of paper, and you are writing on that sheet of paper, okay? You're using that sheet of paper to write something. The ant would be concerned about, he's using a metaphor that perhaps today they would give it as a practice in a mind gym in philosophy classes, for example. You would say that the ant would be very much concerned about the movement of the pen. And perhaps whatever is being scribed on that sheet of paper. But the ant would not start thinking about the hand that is moving the pen. And the arm of which this hand is part of. And the arm of which, or the arm that is part of the individual. And that individual has a mind. And that mind is giving commands for the physical self. And that mind is, and so on, going up into causes, seeing each effect and goes to its cause, to treat that cause as an effect, and so on. But rather, the ant would be very much involved with whatever direct effect or direct cause that it sees, only the immediate cause. He says, don't be like the ant, always seeing the immediate causes. But you should, look deeper than that. Look into the far causes. This notion that Imam Ghazali is saying was mentioned in a treatise about the reality of time. Time is probably the most difficult idea in philosophy. That was said by Imam al-Razi, for example, more than once. So there is one of the scholars from the school of Sidi Muhyiddin ibn Arabi radiallahu ta'ala anhu, his name is Sharafuddin al-Qaysari, Sharafuddin Dawood al-Qaysari. And Sidi Dawood al-Qaysari radiallahu anhu has a treatise called Nihayat al-Bayan fi Dirayat al-Zaman. He's talking about the reality of time. What is time? And he discusses the view of philosophers when they say that time is related to the movement of the earth or the sun and so forth. And that kind of measurement of that movement or that taqdeer would result into this notion of time. And I'm being very casual in explaining what they're saying, okay? Just to reach the notion. So, Shaykh Dawood al-Qaysari radiallahu anhu sees that time is something else. So he says that what philosophers are doing, they're looking to the immediate cause. And they thought that that immediate cause is time. They're not looking further than that. Because he sees time as something that flows or something that is an intrinsic feature of existence. But let's move away from that topic now, okay? The idea is that Shaykh Dawood al-Qaysari is using that same thing that Imam Al-Ghazali is saying. That sometimes people, when they are at a certain reality, and that reality has an immediate cause and a far cause, they will start thinking that this immediate cause is the only cause. And they would never start, articulating that perhaps there are other causes that they need to inspect. So he's saying that those who are very interested in astrology about what was going to happen in the future based on the movements of the planets and the stars and so on, these people are like the ant looking at the pen and not thinking that there is a mind controlling that body, and that body has an arm, and that arm, part of it is a hand, and so on. And then the second reason, he says that it's all speculations. Ahkam al-Nujum they're all speculations. And thirdly, that there is no real benefit out of it. We need to come back, go up in this sort of division that he's using. Imam Al-Ghazali in the beginning said, remember, we're not talking about astrology. Astrology was a branch, but we're rather saying that blameworthy knowledge could be one of three types. The first type, something that is directly harmful to the person or somebody else. The second type is something that is usually harmful to the person. And then he said that the third type of blameworthy knowledge is something that there is no benefit out of. There's no direct benefit from it. But rather, it could cause some kind of perplexity. And he gives two examples for this. One example, he says, and it's a kind of subjective example, because he's saying that if a person or an individual starts learning the intricate, specific, controversial topics in various fields, before he learns the principles and fundamentals and the qawa'id, the usul, before learning these principles and rules and fundamentals, the person would skip these things and go directly to the intricate matters, the matters of debate, the matters that are not really clear, the issues that are perhaps controversial between scholars. A person who would do that is, this type of knowledge for that type of person is blameworthy. And the second example is saying like this, he gives an example of it, the search of what he calls the secrets of the divine existence. And here he gives a metaphor where he describes prophets like doctors. He says prophets are like doctors. Doctors they would usually not deliver to the patients all the secrets of their of their craft, but rather they would give to the patient what is necessary for the patient to know. Says the prophets, it's the same thing. They would not necessarily give every single person all the the secrets, not because, note here, not because there is some kind of a secretive trait in prophethood, but rather because that person is not ready yet to acquire or to receive these secrets. And for some reason, when we say these things, these notions to people, they start thinking that prophecy then, or prophethood, is like an occult group. It's some kind of a cult with mysteries and secrets. But that's not true. Because if you want to give an example to people for this, if you have a group of friends, some of them are very close, and others are, they're still acquaintance, so you did not get to know them very much. Okay? Would you go to those acquaintance, or those people who perhaps you met for the very first time, or even people that you don't know, and you start laying out secrets to them? Would you do that? You probably won't do that. But here, I know I would get an objection that you would not do that because it will inflict harm on yourself. But that's not necessarily true, because these secrets could be about other people, not yourself. That could inflict harm about other people, perhaps. So the idea is that you think before you speak, right? And if you do that as a layperson, prophets would necessarily, be doing something similar, not necessarily the same thing, which is think before you speak. But the idea is that they would only transmit or deliver or disseminate knowledge when it is necessary and in the method that will be appropriate to the person receiving that message. And this is, it is very aligned with any code of communication or even mass communication nowadays. You will only deliver messages or information or data in a way that would not inflict harm on other people, would not cause them to panic, for example. Even if they have to know your message, you have to put it in a context that would not generate panic. I studied this. When we talk, for example, in public health, when there is a disaster, for example, in the code of communication in these incidents, the first thing you need to know, if there are people killed in the streets or died because of some kind of a catastrophe, the first thing you need to do as a public speaker on behalf of a public health agency, for example, the first thing you need to do is to give assurances to the people. Even if the toll of deaths is great. But they say that you have to give assurance to people, even though they also say that you have to be very obvious and very transparent with them as well. So for example, if there's 100 deaths, you don't go out and say there's only 5 people who died. But you don't start describing how the corpses are, laid out in the streets. You don't say that. See? But because it would generate panic. And you don't want that to happen. If we grant that this is permissible, and actually this is recommended, or perhaps this is mandatory, for a public speaker in a government agency, and if we divide the knowledge of that person or of that agency into a knowledge that is appropriate for the public and knowledge that is not appropriate, then it should not be something that is strange to our minds when we say that prophets would have knowledge that is appropriate to the general public of the believers, and other precise, specific knowledge that they would keep for a limited number of believers who would be able to receive and contextualize these types of messages in the correct manner. Okay, and we have to think about it. The Prophet ﷺ, the things that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu would learn from the Prophet ﷺ, or the way Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu would receive things from the Prophet ﷺ is not like anybody was. He has, a bank of faith that would kind of sustain messages or information that to us would be very perplexing. And sorry, Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, it is known that he used to say, "Al-ajzu an darki, al-ajzu an al-idraki idrak." The inability to comprehend is comprehension. See? The inability to comprehend is in itself a comprehension. So, he knew what is comprehensible or comprehensible by the human mind and what is not. He knows where to stop. He knows where to stop and not to start searching for anything beyond. But you find other people, they would never think that there is some kind of a limitation to the human mind. And that would cause them to fall into, problems. And within the Islamic context, if we believe that we would see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in paradise, then if you grant this, if you believe in this, then this would entail that there are things in this life about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala you would never know. Otherwise, where's the edge in paradise? In paradise you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you want this knowledge to be acquired by yourself in this life, then where's the edge? Unless you're granted some kind of hiba because of your sainthood, that's another issue. Okay, so these are the three types of knowledge that are praiseworthy. Again, Imam Al-Ghazali does something that is very smart of him when he is presenting this notion. What he mentioned now, theologians and jurists would not challenge. I want you to analyze the movements of Imam Al-Ghazali in the argument. He says something shocking in the beginning, blameworthy knowledge. He says, hold on, I'm not talking that knowledge is in itself bad. But there are types of knowledge that would lead to bad results. Look, like this, and that. Theologians and jurists would not say no. Jurists and theologians would not say that magic is something beneficial. Jurists and theologians would not say that astrology is something beneficial. Jurists and theologians would all believe that there are parts and areas in their disciplines that should not be transferred to the mass public unless there is a proper context for it. So again, Imam Al-Ghazali is creating this area of common ground, because he would go on and would start saying, there are 5 words, if you grant this, if you grant that there is blameworthy knowledge, which is the knowledge that would lead to a harm, or would harm to the person, or inflict harm to somebody else, or knowledge that is usually harmful, or knowledge that is not useful, if you grant that these categories exist, let's move on and discuss 5 areas. I want you to note something here. Imam Al-Ghazali was defining these categories and giving examples. But these examples are examples at the end of the day. In other words, don't define the first category, which is knowledge that is harmful. Don't define it by magic. Magic is an example of it. Okay? So he uses these categories and he gives examples because examples would lead the jurists or the readers in general to concur. If he had said a knowledge that is harmful and you stop, people will start saying like, what? They would not go on and start thinking, is there really a type of knowledge that could be harmful? Let's think about it. People usually don't do that. But they would usually ask, like what? So he gave that answer directly. Like magic, done. Like astrology, done. Like intricate matters in belief or intricate matters in disciplines that are not to be given out in the open, communication between scholars and the mass public. Done. If you grant the types, not the examples necessarily. If you accept the examples, these are not examples floating out in the air. These are examples used to prove the existence of their category. Okay? So if you accept these examples as examples of these particular categories, then you believe in these categories. Alright? If you believe in these categories, I want you now to examine with me these 5 areas. And the first area is fiqh. But he does not say it as an area. He says we want to examine the term fiqh. Lafzul fiqh. And the introduction he gives before this examination, he says, many problems happen in our stances or positions are results of words that would have different meanings, or terms that are used for different meanings. And if you guys recall, in the very first lecture, we talked about how Imam Al-Ghazali was very much concerned about this idea of terminologies. And he would say that there are 2 phenomena that go along with each other. Whenever you find one, you find the other, which is sectarianism and this idea of grasping or acquiring judgments from terms, which is pretty much stereotyping. When you find the phenomena of sects, that people are being divided into groups, you would immediately start seeing stereotyping, and you start seeing that people would coin terms to judge people instead of taking the time into, analyzing what's there. Because, the human mind is sort of seeking ease. Instead of, meeting a person and getting to know him, you would rather, only from that outward appearance, give a term. That person, he looks like a Sufi. Done. I will deal with him as a Sufi. This person is a Salafi. I will deal with him as a Salafi. This person looks like that. I will deal with him on that terms. Like all Sufis are like the same thing, which is not true. Like all Salafis are the same, which is not true. And so on. Like all Muslims are the same, that's not true. Like all Egyptians are the same, that's not true. and so on. Why did you guys laugh at this? You think that all Egyptians are the same? You're stereotyping. Okay. They're not. Give them a chance. Okay. So the idea is that same thing happens. What happens with people happens in academia. Perhaps nowadays when you say philosophy, people would get some kind of an understanding of philosophy, which is not necessarily true. Or if it's true sometimes, not true in all cases. When you say science now, people think of an idea. It's not always the same. So there are terms that the stereotyping, in other words, the stereotyping that happens with affiliations, group affiliations, might also occur in the spheres of scholars. Okay? So he says the word fiqh has been moved from the idea of understanding in the religion, having some kind of a firm understanding in the totality of the religion, not necessarily in one area, which is the religious rulings and verdicts. But part of religion is also the belief that is necessary. Part of the religion, the spiritual dimension of it as well. What Imam Al-Ghazali is saying, that fiqh from the beginning entailed or incorporated al-Islam wal-Iman wal-Ihsan. The action, the belief, the actions, al-Iman wal-Islam wal-Ihsan. The belief, the actions, and the Ihsan, which is tasawwuf, or which is a spiritual dimension. So these are the three aspects. And that was narrated in the words of Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu ta'ala anhu when he used to describe what fiqh is. مَعْرِفَةُ النَّفْسِ مَا لَهَا وَمَا عَلَيْهَا. Knowing the self, knowing what is a duty on oneself, and knowing what is a right for oneself. This is what fiqh. And this is probably, that was fiqh before Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu ta'ala anhu. People would deal with fiqh in religion as something that would entail all these three areas, not a specific branch. So the word fiqh was taken from the religious lexicon, from the religious context, and they confined that word, according to Imam Ghazali, they confined that word and they limited that term to refer to the academic discipline responsible to study the phenomena of religious verdicts related to the actions of individuals, which emerged as the discipline of law, or the legal discipline within the Islamic world. So this is the first term that Imam Ghazali is giving. The second term that he examined was the word ilm. He says that the word ilm, if you guys remember, we have, since the beginning, we have been talking about ilm. Is ilm a science or is it knowledge? He says that they took the word ilm, and he says back then, before the limit ilm to debates, arguments, opinions, before they take the word ilm and use it in that context, ilm used to be knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His attributes, His actions, and so on and so forth. That was ilm. So when you say ilmuddin, people would think of that, knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, knowing these issues in the religion, these articles or tenets of faith, that would be considered ilm. But then, again, the word ilm began to be confined to the academic sphere. Like, now we only see that ilm is what a person has to write in a book or in an academic journal. But if we find a simple person who is very religious, has a deep connection, relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knows priorities, knows what is mandatory for him, what is recommended, what is halal and what is haram, observing the practices of religion. People don't see this person as a alim, or don't see him as a person who has ilm. And when he speaks, he uses metaphors and similes, and he speaks in a manner that everybody would understand. And he would not start using nomenclature and terminologies of sciences, but would talk in a very casual form. They would start looking down on that person. But somebody else who uses big words, you find books that are printed in this area, words that would indicate that you are intelligent. There are books that are printed in that. Like 500 words or 1,000 words that all academics should know, for example. And you find big words that they're using. Like, I'll give you an example. Back then, people used the word think instead of brainstorm. Right? But now we began using the word brainstorming. And then they made a new word, ideate. Ideate. Yeah? Ideate is pretty much brainstorm. Yeah, turn something into an idea, which is brainstorm an idea, which is to come up with an idea, which is to have an idea. That's it. So having an idea began to be brainstorming, and then brainstorming began to be ideating. So they use big words, but when you deconstruct that word, you come back to very simple structure. So what is the real difference from that position, from that standpoint, from that context? What is the real difference then between an academic scholar and somebody who is wise? The distinction between these two people is only in the words that are being used. That's it. From that point of view. Because there are other areas. There are certain specialized areas in knowledge where a person who is not involved in that area would not necessarily know. But the idea is, Imam Al-Ghazali is saying here, the word ilm was hijacked by academics. And then they made it seem for everybody as if whatever they know is knowledge. Whatever anybody else would know is not necessarily knowledge. Okay? And Imam Al-Ghazali here is, the between the lines, he is referring to the Sufis. He's saying that you guys as theologians and jurists are looking down on Sufis because they don't necessarily use that same terminologies and that big words. I'm asking a question, I'm not claiming something. Could that be one of the reasons why Sufis after that began to write books where it had symbolic terminologies and would have, eloquent structures and would discuss things in a language that on one hand seem comprehensible, but on the other hand is really mysterious. Could that be one of the reasons? Some kind of retaliation? I don't know. Because this is sort of indicated in some of their writings, actually. Especially in the post Sidi Muhyiddin ibn Arabi radiallahu ta'ala anhu period. he would start. I read this meaning in the Sharh al-Fusus by Sayyid Dawud al-Qaysari, and perhaps it was also mentioned by Sadruddin al-Qawlawi radiallahu ta'ala anhu, where that we had to speak in that language because this is the language that theologians would understand. See, Dawud al-Qaysari almost said that. We're using this language because this is the language they understand. Then the third, actually before we move on to the third term, see, when this happens to the word ilm, I guess you already grasp that it has an inflection on the word alim. Because when they described ilm as terminologies, arguments, debates, being able to prove using rhetoric, and being able to prove things based on what you write and the way you speak and things of that sort, the methods of research and of proving an opinion in sciences or in disciplines, when that became the definition of knowledge, of ilm, a person who's not able to do this is not an alim. And then this creates a big problem, because the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that the prophets did not leave anything to their heirs but knowledge. So if prophets, the inheritance of knowledge of prophets is knowledge, and knowledge is defined as ulum, as sciences, then the heirs of the prophets are what? The jurists and theologians. But the Sufis don't use that. They don't use all these debates and arguments and adab al-bahth wal-munadhara, the etiquette or the code of research and the code of debate. They don't use logic. They don't use systematic structures. So they're not scientists, they're not scholars, so they're out of the hadith. And then you find, see, Dawud al-Qaysari would start saying that actually this hadith in particular is talking about saints and not anybody else. He said that ulama al-zahir, the jurists and the theologians, are out of this hadith. Not that both of us, Sufis or saints and theologians and jurists together are the heirs of the prophets. Actually, no. Only saints. Because it said the person who inherits somebody else, that is based on the relationship between both of them. And people don't choose the relationships. The relationships are granted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't choose who's your father, you don't choose who's your mother, you don't choose who's your uncle, who's your grandpa, who's your grandparent. But this is something that is given to you. So inheritance is not something kasbi. It's not something that you work on to acquire. It is something that is granted, wahbi. So if the Prophet ﷺ is defining knowledge as mirath, as inheritance, then he's talking about knowledge that is granted, not acquired. And the knowledge of sainthood is granted and not acquired. Because sainthood is part of prophethood, and prophethood is not acquired. There's no such thing as working on until you would reach the level, the position of where you get promoted to be a prophet. There's no such thing as that. Prophets are selected, predetermined by the predetermined selection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And same thing goes with saints. It's not something that you choose. You're chosen. It's not something that you work on. Okay? So if that is the case, then the hadith is describing saints, not describing scientists and scholars in classrooms and lectures in universities. it. And the third term is Tawheed. And he is saying that this term began to be, again, limited to the idea of ilm al-kalam. And what Imam Al-Ghazali forecasted did occur. Because when you now start, when you ask students in any kind of Ash'ari institution, if you go to any kind of student of knowledge and ask him a question, if you have a person who is coming to you and asking you, I want to learn my aqidah, my belief, would you suggest something to me I study or I read? And sometimes you get the answer, Jawharat al-Tawheed. Do you ever see that question and answer happen in front of you? That al-Mubtadi', the beginner, would take Jawharat al-Tawheed. And here the student of knowledge is not realizing something. Talib al-ilm here is not realizing something. That a beginner is a type of individuals that is not necessarily the general public. What is suitable for a college freshman is not necessarily suitable for people walking down the street. Not because it's easy, it's because level 1, it is necessarily be delivered or given or handed to any kind of individual who's interested in something. So you would find people suggesting or recommending a person who wants to learn his aqidah should learn Jawharat al-Tawheed. That's false. That's a false recommendation. Jawharat al-Tawheed is a text for academic studies. It's not a text for an individual to learn his belief from. And note, it is a text in an area called ilm al-kalam. And ilm al-kalam is not responsible to inculcate belief in the hearts of individuals. Ilm al-kalam is for the defense of al-aqeedah. This is how ilm al-kalam originally emerged. So ilm al-kalam is the responsibility, the task of ilm al-kalam is not to establish belief in the hearts of individuals, but rather the role of ilm al-kalam is to defend whatever is in the hearts of individuals. They have this ability to use the words as a weapon, so to speak, to defend. This is whenever a person is attacking the belief verbally, verbal attack, then ilm al-kalam is a retaliation to that attack. This is what ilm al-kalam is. And you'd find in Christianity, we call theology apologetics. Because apologetics, you're doing apology, you're defending. So ilm al-kalam in Islam was pretty much the same thing as well. You're defending, you're retaliating. So whatever is used to retaliate is not necessarily used to establish, to build. And this is something that Sidi Ahmed al-Faruqi al-Hindi says in Al-Maktubat. Says that actually seeking belief from the books of Ilm al-Kalam would hinder your belief. Because it is, because the mindset, the approach of these books, the person writing these books, in the back of his mind, he is thinking, oh, I am putting this here because they would say this, and then we would have to say that. The person writing is like an army person, an army general, preparing his soldiers for war. This is the mindset he's using. So he has some kind of strategy for attack and for defense and so on. So when you go into that book, that realm of hostility, and you're seeking tranquility of faith from these books. How would that happen? You're using the wrong means for an end. So these books, as I said, would cause, as Imam Sahindi had said, would cause perplexity for the person. And I guess now you guys realize how much the Muslim reality has been hindered by the absence of real Sufism in the Muslim societies. Because the argument of God's existence in Sufism comes from the argument, is the argument from experience. When you talk about the arguments in the philosophy of religion, when they categorize the arguments for the existence of God, there is a cosmological argument that is perhaps used by Imam Al-Ghazali in his book Al-Ghazali. And William Lane Craig wrote that, short, brief but important book called, which is very packed with knowledge, of course, called the Kalam Cosmological Argument. He's a Christian theologian, and he used the words of Imam Al-Ghazali and developed the words of Imam Al-Ghazali as a way to retaliate against atheists in America, for example, and elsewhere. So he wrote the Kalam Cosmological Argument. So this is a kind of argument that the theologians would use. There's the argument from contingency, for example, al-huduth wal-imkan and so on. But at the end of the day, there is also an argument from religious experience. And the source of that argument, the source of that proof, and it's not an argument then, the source of that proof is a Sufi journey, a Sufi affiliation, so to speak, where there is perhaps a physical dimension to that experience. You see, all the arguments that are being presented in books of theology, the things that require to use the reason, rational thinking, the mind. But there is no aspect of spirit, and also there's no physical aspect as well. Because with saints, for example, you would see karamat by them, or you would see karamat on you resulted by them, by your affiliation with them, and so on and so forth. So you start experiencing things physically, and also experiencing things spiritually, and that dimension is not available in these books. And Imam Sahindi is saying this is the proof of belief because it is a prototype of what the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum saw from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I know it will sound funny, but I don't mean to joke. When a companion wanted to believe in Allah, in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, before he would believe, he would not ask one of the followers, one of the Sahaba. Like imagine this, a companion, when he was still a disbeliever, would go to a companion of the Prophet ﷺ who's already a believer and says, look, I am considering to be a Muslim. Talk to me about it. He would not bring him out Jawhar al-Tawheed. He would not bring out Kitab al-Irshad by Imam al-Juwayni. He would not bring out Al-Matalib al-Aliyah by Imam al-Razi. He would not bring out these books were that was not the method. He would not say, all right, you know what, sit down, let's debate this. He did not necessarily do that. When did debate occur? You would usually find that the Prophet ﷺ or the companions, they don't seek it. They would rather wait. If somebody comes and starts debating and forces that agenda, they would start, pushing back. Otherwise, they would not initiate it. On their own, they would not start going and saying, you know what, let's debate this. in the kind of a formal, debating. They would start persuading them. But persuasion is something and debate is something else. They would start trying to convince them, but convincing is something, but debating is something else. And the way a father would try to persuade a child, or vice versa, a child would try, if you're trying to persuade your father to, increase your allowance, you don't debate it. You would start, telling how good you are, and you start smiling in his face, and and perhaps giving some flattering comments and things of that notion, right? And then they would immediately grasp that you're trying to get something. This is what you would do, but you would not start saying, "Look, you're giving me that X amount of money, and I am responsible of 1, 2, and 3. The prices are increasing, and we are experiencing an inflation in the economy by %. Therefore, and since you are responsible of me so far, then I demand you don't do that. Actually, if you do that, they would never give you anything, right? Unless you crack them up because you're doing so, and then they would give you the money. But probably that would work only once, because then they would, get the idea." So the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala did not use the method of debate as a way to call people. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, same thing. So here, again, what the companions experienced with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you would see, for example, the water coming out of his hand. Seeing that how a small dish would serve hundreds of people or tens of people that would normally only serve a couple or only a handful of individuals. So you start experiencing these miracles. And at the same time, you would start experiencing what I consider to be a miracle, which is the sudden shift in their personalities. And perhaps very few people that, which is unfortunate, that talked about this particular miracle, because it's a miracle to do 180 degrees shift in a society. You can do that with a couple of individuals, with a group of individuals, but to do that with a society, to change their norms in that short period of time, to change their etiquette, to change their actions, their routine, their habits. Talk to somebody who's addicted, any kind of addiction. Tell them or ask them about how hard it's for them to leave that addiction. And then you would find a society that is addicted to drink alcohol, all of them would quit at once. In a very short period of time. How would that work? How would you change the beliefs of individuals in gender differences, for example? Because they used to kill, infants, girls or infant females. And then they started introducing the notion of ummahatul mu'mineen. So they're leaders of the society. Doing that shift is a miracle in itself. And this is actually an indicator that Sufis has mentioned in their books. They said, if the murid or if the person wants to know if that shaykh is a real shaykh or not, how would they know? He said, if you find a change, a positive change in yourself, without necessarily so much action from your part, then he is a real shaykh. That only by being with that person, not necessarily doing so many hard work, ritual hard work, but only being with that person hours or even minutes, and finding that spiritual uplift, then this person is real. All of these, they're spiritual and physical things that you experience. You perceive by the physical senses, or you feel it. And what we mean by spiritual is that in your inner self you're feeling that. And note, I'm saying you're feeling, not rationalizing that. It's not something that is based on logic. So that is Tawheed that Imam Al-Ghazali would, or this is what Imam Al-Ghazali would call Tawheed. Whatever else is Ilm al-Kalam, and he is rejecting this idea that we confine Tawheed to Ilm al-Kalam. Another problem actually in confining Tawheed in Ilm al-Kalam that you find sometimes, this is the last notion with this term, you find Ash'ari students, unfortunately, when they study Aqidah, they start limiting their studies to the books, or what we call of al-ma'qulat, rational books that only use the method of rational reasoning. And then when it comes to the hadith, to the proofs of a creed from the hadith or from the Quran, you find the person not really available to deliver. And this is again another problem. Because whatever is in books of Ilm al-Kalam is actually a defense of what is there in the Sunnah and what's there in the Quran. So if you know the syllogism, the logical syllogism, but you don't know the origin of it, or what is it really defending, then there is a gap. There is no connection between the revelation and the method you're using in its defense. It's like defending something that you don't know. And for this reason, sometimes the Ash'ari Salafi debate does not move forward because one person, on one hand, who is the Ash'ari, is only using logical syllogisms, and that Salafi person is only using narrations. First of all, this is not an appropriate debate because each one is using a different language. Each one is talking about different contexts. So that kind of khilaf, actually that kind of difference, is not considered from that point of view a real difference. It's only a real difference when, or a real, not difference, a real frontation or confrontation between these two opponent and proponent. Two opponents. When does a debate properly structured? When both individuals are discussing the same topic. If they're not discussing the same topic, or they're coming from different backgrounds, they need in the beginning to create some kind of common ground. Okay, اللفظ الرابع, Imam Al-Ghazali talks about الذكر والتذكير. And I want you to know something, that الذكر بالكسر, الذكر is different than الذكر. الذكر is to remember. الذكر is to remember by vocalizing. But to remember something in your mind, that's dhukr. To remember something by saying dhikr, like to mention something, okay? Mentioning something verbally is dhikr. Remembering something in your mind is dhukr. Imam Al-Ghazali here in this part, he is discussing something that used to happen in his time, and the context of it today is two things. See, Imam Ghazali is saying that in his time, people start thinking of dhikr and tadhkir. Dhikr, of course, he's talking about remembrance, and he's taking remembrance that is by the tongue, without getting into all the intricate matters of the the remembrance by the heart and all these issues. But all in all, he's talking about dhikr meaning remembrance, and tadhkir, he uses that word for preaching. Okay? And actually uses the word dhikr to refer to what they call majalis dhikr, like the circles of dhikr, or any type of gathering that involves some kind of a ritual, a spiritual ritual. Okay? Spiritual ritual. He's saying that in his time, they began thinking of a dhikr as what they call majalis al-sama', where people, they would start, giving poetry or singing songs or doing some kind of inshad. And he's saying that dhikr, or the circles of rituals, began to transform into circles for inshad and things of that sort. And when it comes to preaching, he says that preaching is suffering from that people are using what he calls ad-da'awi al-'arida, or ad-da'awi al-'arida. And in other words, people are giving or delivering big statements or big claims about the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To illustrate this more, this is what he's talking about is similar nowadays to people who only think that Sufism is Jalaluddin al-Rumi. Okay? And that you put a sibha around your wrist instead of wearing a wristband. Right? Even if you don't use it, but just put it around your wrist because it's cool. Alright? And read Jalaluddin al-Rumi even if you don't know who he is or what he's trying to say. And if you know who he is, you would know who he is through a novel. And so the 4 rules of love. And we would start listening to songs that talk about divine love. And we would attend yoga gatherings, and that's part of spirituality, all this new age stuff. The other reality or the other phenomena that we see is the Muslim prototype of televangelists. You know televangelists? Televangelists are evangelical preachers in America. You know, evangelical preachers that, so in America, they have something that is called mega churches. This is recorded, that's cool. They have something called mega churches, all right? Mega churches are like churches that are big as basketball stadiums, all right? I cannot really refer to a basketball stadium here in Egypt because we don't really play basketball. But it's a basketball stadium, and basketball stadiums in American basketball is a common sport. And so that's why they call mega, because they have all these humongous places that would get a great number of people attending, like a speech or something. And these places would have like McDonald's in it, Starbucks, things of that sort, within that mega complex. And they would perhaps attend a speech or something by a person who's a preacher, all right? But sometimes use this word televangelists because these people are the Christian preachers that come on television and start having like TV shows to talk about stuff. And I remember about almost 10 years ago, I used to do an anthropological study, a comparative anthropological study with an American friend, where we do a comparison between the Egyptian religious channels that began to involve preachers coming out on television, delivering series or TV shows, religious TV shows, and comparing what they do to the televangelists that come on television in America, for example. And they're very much similar. You see, this idea, you always find these TV shows, those media guys that talk about religion on TV. They're always smiling. They're always, dressed in a very, eloquent, elegant way. They start having, different lights, effects, and then and things began to develop. And sometimes now when they talk, you find background music that is usually has some kind of Andalusian flavor to it. And the beginning and the end, you find some kind of a song, and people start having this song as a mobile ringtone, right? And you find a person coming to talk to you about zuhd, for example, and he's wearing like a 10,000 pounds watch in his hand, right? And that's why you find, real shuyukh, for example, they don't do these sort of shows. They would rather have their lectures in the mosque be recorded. And I used to tell some people, the problems of these TV shows,